What's up, everybody, and welcome back to the Enterprise Dish. I'm Brad, and we got Ducks over here back again to talk more Office goodness because it's Office all the time. I actually don't think it's possible to get away from talking about Office at least once a week, and so it's always a pleasure to have you back, Ducks, and diving back into just the... before the show, we were talking about a little bit of the hilarity of Office 365, but at the end of the day, it is a massively productivity suite and very good for Microsoft and the enterprise and for podcasting, apparently, as well.
100%. And thank you for having me back. I thought after the last episode, you were iffy if I should come back or not. I haven't heard from you.
Well, I believe the saying is keep your friends closer, but your enemies closer. Is the appropriate way. No, but absolutely love having Ducks here because he is extremely knowledgeable in all of these things. And let's just dive in, shall we? Ducks, you actually posted up on Petri a couple weeks back, lift and shift migrations. Why? Can you just, take a step back, high level? What is a lift and shift migration?
Sure. So when we talk about lift and shift, it's essentially taking everything that you have from your files in file share, and some of you may be using SharePoint, your SharePoint sites, taking as is and moving it to your new destination, in this case, moving into Office 365. So that's lift and shift. It's just like moving to a house and you decide, you know what, it's too much work to organize, to sort it out. Let me just box everything and bring it to the new place. That's lift and shift.
Yeah, and it honestly, on the cover, that sounds great, right? It's almost like you're paying people to move. They do all the dirty work. You just kind of lift and shift. So clearly, when things sound too simple, especially in the IT world, there's got to be some sort of hang-ups, or what do people need to know about this as they start to go down to this type of a journey?
Well, there's three things. I mean, if you guys get the chance to read the article, feel free to do so. But there's three key points I want folks to remember and think about when we talk about migration. Today, we live in a very complex time where there's so much data all over the place. And when I talk about so much data, in fact, I'm just going to limit it to unstructured data, from file shares to SharePoint, Box, e-rooms or Lotus Notes, all over the place, right? So we have so much data. When I talk to customers, they're like, wow, I have 3 petabytes of data. I don't know how I'm going to move all of that. So that is already an issue. It's just the enormity of all this can overwhelm people. The second point is, we're not back in the simple days where not only we have limited data, but we have all kinds of data. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, I hate to say this, a lot of mission critical data sits in our unstructured data sources. I mean, Brad, if I were to ask you, do you know if you have, I don't know, social security numbers and Word documents in your file share? Can you honestly tell me that you don't?
So, well, that's interesting. I could probably tell you that that HR stuff.
Yeah. Or if credit card numbers.
Right.
Again, people aren't malicious, but that's the easy way to work. You get an email with a payment. You may send an invoice to a customer. They send a payment with a credit card number there as an attachment, and then you move that attachment to some folder that's being shared, right? And that's just how we work. And no malicious intent, but the problem now is we may not kept it in a safe place, and people moving this stuff, if they move it to the wrong place where it's exposed to a lot of people, then it's a problem. So that's why lift and shift doesn't work. The third point is there's certain limits around moving these things. There's throttling limits. There's also the need of privacy and regulatory requirements now where, for example, GDPR is coming up in May. There's a lot of rules and articles around personal information of European citizens, where we can't just put it where we think we could just, move stuff to. So there's a lot of these different considerations now that's why I'm making a case that lift and shift, as we would done traditionally, just doesn't work anymore.
Interesting. So it's funny that you bring that up. And obviously you've got a plethora of experience in this type of world because it sounds so easy, right? Well, I'm running Office on-prem. I've got all these just Word docs just sitting here. Microsoft right now runs Office 365. I can just chunk it into OneDrive and we should just be good. But apparently that doesn't sound like that's the case anymore.
No, because even in the on-prem world, I get into situations now with customers, forget Office 365, they would have breaches, or not necessarily breaches, but they wouldn't pass audits, right? They get audited, and somehow an auditor would go to their intranet, for example, and then just run some simple tests, and they would find PII that's not supposed to surface, which is not a good thing. And if you have that problem today, moving what you have to a new place, as they would say, garbage in, garbage out, right? You still have that problem.
Yeah. Fun fact about Brad's prior life: Brad used to do PII audits from a financial perspective for large companies like that. Those are. And
now I see why you got away from that career.
Yeah, well, I got away from it, but yet here we are. It's I wouldn't say the darker days, but it's an interesting world because there's a lot of compliance, and if you don't know what you're doing and you don't have an expert on that other side making sure that you're abiding by that stuff, it can really sting the bottom line, and I've seen it happen.
And the good news is, if you move to Office 365, so let's say you're done, you did your homework, you moved correctly. Once you're in your new house in Office 365, boy, Microsoft has a lot of cool technologies that can help enforce a lot of these data governance and data compliance. Things like Office 365 Compliance Center, where it has data loss protection capabilities, or data loss prevention capabilities, where you can say, moving forward, we're not going to allow credit card numbers in this data repository, and it's going to actively monitor it, right? Second is you have Azure information protection, which could do a ton of good things. So, for example, it could do classification, it could do labeling, and then you got Azure's cloud security capabilities as well. So there's tons of good stuff that once you move, you can actively enforce a lot of these regulations and compliance capabilities.
Well, that is actually good news on the other side, especially when you think about a company like Microsoft.
Sure.
They're obviously going to have to understand it much more probably than you are, because not only are you their customer who is dependent on it, they have tens of thousands and quite literally billions of dollars on the line for getting this right. So their incentive to be wrong is much higher. Not that anybody's going to maliciously put their data in a bad place. At least I hope not. But you get at least Microsoft's help in that process.
For sure.
Interesting. Question for you, Dux, then, on this migration stuff. So if lift and shift isn't the way to go, in your opinion, what's the proper way to start thinking about a migration then?
Yeah, and from a practical perspective, right, the advice I would provide a lot of colleagues I talk to, a lot of customers, is essentially 4 steps. The first step is you got to discover and assess the kind of data that you have. So to put it simply, first of all, what are you moving and where are you moving it from? Right? I'm moving it from FileShare, from Lotus Notes, from SharePoint, Box, Dropbox. So I'm moving it to a new, Office 365 tenant, to OneDrive or SharePoint. So you got to know where the stuff is coming from. And then you run a scan and do an inventory of what you think you're moving. Now, some of you may go, well, that's a lot of work. I can't do it manually. Well, the good news is there's a lot of tools out there. So, for example, Microsoft has a free migration assessment tool. You download, just look for SharePoint Migration Assessment Tool. It can actually tell you what you have. And there's other tools out there that's free too, that you can run a scan. Once you find or get an inventory of what you want to move, then the next step is what you want to do is get rid of what's called redundant, obsolete, or trivial data. It could be duplicate copies of file. It could be, Brad's awesome version of this Word document _1.
And it is awesome.
_2, right? So you got to clean up. The first order of business is to clean up stuff. Minimize what you want to move. And then second is once you figure out what you want to move, make sure you understand if there's things you need to protect. You can't protect them all. What are your crown jewels, right? Boy, I found social security numbers. I found credit card numbers. I found employee information. And then once you assess all these things, what they call controlled workloads, then you got to do your due diligence and make sure you classify and tag them correctly. And just make it simple when you tag it. It can be confidential, private, top secret, right? Have a schema on how you classify and tag this. So that's step 1. Understand what you have and assess what you're going to move. Step 2 is you then actually decide on what your data governance policy is. Now, I'm not talking about creating a constitution, right? Essentially, your data governance policy would dictate how are you going to protect your data. Number 1, the kind of protection do you want to have? What are the rules, right? The rules will apply to certain types of data. It may not apply to certain types of data. Second is, where do these rules apply to? Well, if it's in OneDrive, this is the kind of rules that's going to apply. If it's in SharePoint, if it's in Teams, right, or this one rule applies to all of them, then that's great as well. Number 3, is how do you enforce these rules? Traditionally, we rely on people to do the right thing, but we know how that ends up. The concept of data governance is not new, but in the past is we have this big book of policies and governance and expect people to remember, but people don't. And that's the thing I was talking about earlier. The good news is Microsoft Office 365 Azure has a lot of technology in place that you can proactively enforce these policies. So you set that up, right? And then the last step is you should have the ability to regularly report on incidents. Because even if you have all the automated rules running, monitoring, no credit card, bad things can still happen. Now, if bad things happen, is there a way for you to audit and report that says, hey, on this day, Brad uploaded this, but the system fixed it? Because once you get audited, let's say for reasons like GDPR, you have a way to prove that, hey, look, I followed all the guidelines, and here's an audit and a log and a report saying I did it, right? So it's an incident management type of mechanism. So these are the 4 steps.
Those are good steps. Now, let me throw a little wrench into that. Do your steps change at all if you are an enterprise company of 100,000 people or you are a mom and pop business of 10 people?
Slightly. That's a great question. So if you're a mom and pop company of 10 people, regardless if you're 10 people or 100,000 people, if you're in business and you have control workloads, PII data, it doesn't matter. We're all responsible to take care of that data. Now, do those steps change? Slightly. The steps that may change, that may vary, is in the area of establishing your data governance policies. Certainly, if you're a large business, large companies, you have tons of employees and tons of customers, then absolutely, because you have to fulfill and subscribe to a multitude of regulations. It may not just be GDPR, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, Run DMC, whatever. But if you're a smaller organization and you're catering to a niche market and limited customer base, then yeah, your regulation that you have to subscribe to may just be 1 or 2. Then your policies may be much more limited.
It's good stuff. That's pretty genuine insight to thinking about how to move. And that's obviously a trend that we're seeing. Is obviously Microsoft has over 120 million corporate seats, I think, at this point, and I don't see that number slowing down. And especially as these regulations kick up, because it's a lot easier to say, hey, look, Microsoft is helping us take care of it, rather than the 100-person company in Europe trying to figure out how they're going to do GDPR. For sure.
And then I suspect GDPR is just the tip of the iceberg.
Yep.
I suspect it's a good thing, don't get me wrong, but I suspect as a result, there's more regulations that are coming out. And then I'm sure in the news lately you've been seeing, right? Like the Cloud Act.
Yep.
Well, it's not directly related to GDPR, but it has a lot to do with privacy and information access.
Yep. And there's very much, it happened, I think, even last week, that you hear about a company like, I believe it was Delta, and somebody else got their data compromised, and all your credit cards and everything else you could ever care about have once again fallen into the black market.
Or the city of Atlanta, right? There's a big breach for the whole city. So.
Yeah, I forgot about, that was the other one. I forgot about the city of Atlanta.
But I want to make sure that the message is clear, though. Don't think if you're in the cloud, your data is compromised. It's not about that. But we're just in a day and age of a lot of breaches going on. But it's not to say that if you go to the cloud, you're not safe. In fact, I would argue if you go to the cloud, you're safer.
Yep, and I think it all goes back to that same principle of Amazon, Google, whoever it is, they have a much bigger incentive to protect your data to the best of their ability than anybody else, because if they get compromised, it's going to happen eventually, I think. It's just a matter of when. I think you'd probably agree nobody's unhackable. You can just do the best you can. And at some point, one of these cloud vendors is going to get compromised, and it'll be curious to see how everybody reacts when that does happen.
I'm going to go back my paper and pen. How's that?
Well, that would be quite interesting. Always good stuff. But we're going to keep moving along here, because Dux, since we've talked last, again, impacting the Office 365 world, Microsoft did a massive reorganization of Windows. Terry Myerson is now leaving the company, and they effectively split up his org into 2 groups. You kind of have like the front end experiences, then you also have the development of the backside, but you could argue that it's potentially into 3 groups, because you have the Office experience on one side, but then core development of the OS is by Jason Zander, but Jason isn't on the senior leadership team. That reports up to Scott Guthrie, and then Guthrie is on the leadership team. So there's effectively 3 people now in direct control of Windows.
That's right.
But at the same time, Office is once again being positioned as the crown jewel. I'm curious, just, gut reaction. What do you think about all this, Dux?
I think in a way it's a good thing that Microsoft is responding to the vast change in the market, because if you look at broadly, right, I hate to say this, but Windows on the desktop as a client software, frankly, is becoming less and less relevant. I saw a post a couple of days after this big shakeout is the concept of Windows as a service, and I can see that happening, right? If that does happen, I'm sure. It's going to sit on Azure where it makes sense. It falls under Scott Guthrie's organization.
Yep.
But then the second point you raised around Office 365 becoming the crown jewel, or becoming a bigger crown jewel, so to speak, I think it's not going to stop. I think it's going to continue to expand. If you look at within the Office 365 suite of offerings, you talk about crown jewel, Microsoft Teams is still the cool kid on the block. Yep. It's growing leaps and bounds. I don't know if you saw the Forbes article lately, and then they celebrated their 1-year anniversary. So as a result of that, I think the push and the growth and the adoption, frankly, on Office 365 would just continue to grow and expand.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch, because I would imagine that if you want a promotion inside of Microsoft, you come up with an app that lives inside of Office 365, because that is where they want everything, their serviceable value for the consumer and for the enterprise. But if you can develop a Teams or something else that lives inside of Office 365, that is going to be a huge draw to anybody on the leadership team at Microsoft, I'd have to think right now.
I mean, at the end of the day, right, if you look at the SaaS business, it's all about consumption now. And if you look at Teams, certainly I love Teams, I use Teams, but look at the pull-through that Teams offers from the other suite of technologies.
Yep.
I mean, SharePoint is a file storage. Certainly OneNote is there. And Teams relies on Office 365 groups. And when Office 365 group is spin up, you get, your Planner, again, your Teams, your SharePoint. So there's a lot of pull-through around the other products. And then Skype for Business now coming into Teams down the road. Boy, that's just going to continue to make it sticky, so to speak.
Yeah, and speaking of making it sticky here, Dux, some questions for you, only because as I told you before the show, this is the most insider baseball thing I think I can come up with at this time. On April 11th, my company, the BWB Media Group, we are switching all to Teams right now. We currently use Skype, the consumer version. We also have a bunch of different other tools. We've used Dropbox in the past, but Teams is going to be the first leg of our journey of going all Office 365 and getting rid of everything else. So wait, you didn't do email first? No.
Oh,
wow. Bluntly, well, there's a reason for that, because most of our collaboration right now occurs on what's called Basecamp, which is a site collaboration. We don't do much through email. Obviously, client emails come in and we service them through email. But if we're working on a project like this podcast, for example, has a Basecamp where I can go and update things and keep it all at. Right. That's where kind of all of that lives. And we're eventually going to try to move. The first thing is get off of Skype for consumer, go on to Teams. And then inside of Teams we'll live, and then we'll eventually explore channels and see if we can make those work. Our development team is already working on using Planner to help plan out, obviously, our roadmap for development and features and product offerings and like that. Email, even though it's kind of makes sense to go first, it's such a low kind of hanging fruit. We just need it's either on or off. For us, it doesn't really make a difference. Right now it's on Google Apps. And then I would assume we would eventually port that over. But
email to me is like dial tone, right?
Yeah.
Email is email. So I don't even know if you know what dial tone is. Were you born when dial tone was still around?
Let me throw this one at you, Dux. I lobbied my parents when I was a kid to get a second phone line. That way I could be on the internet without them. Mom, hang up the phone. You're going to ruin my browsing experience. So. Yes, Doc. I'm not that young. I am young, but I'm not.
I remember those modem handshake.
I remember kind of. Well, I used to use a thing called HCCA net, many years ago. That's kind of where I learned the HTML coding, if you want to call it, whatever you want to call that. But I remember having a 3600 baud modem, I believe it was. That was my first way of playing. I used to play a game called Command and Conquer by Westwood Studios with another friend, and I remember he upgraded to a 1440, and then I went to 2880. Then, like many years later, we both ended up on 56K.
And you thought that was it, right? You're the Mac Daddy of all internet connectivity.
Oh yeah, I was the first kid on my block to have a CD burner, and this thing was quite literally like the size of a small toaster. It was a 2X and would take like 4 to 8 hours to burn a CD.
I gotta tell you, want to talk about old school? I got something here in my office. So check this out. Have you seen one of these before?
Yeah, that's just.
But here's the cool part. So I have this thing where I can plug into my.
Oh, nice.
Samsung S9 Plus. So sometimes I would do this, just throw people off.
Yeah.
Even in a car, and police officer comes by like, "What's wrong with him?" You know, the only thing I'm missing is those shoulder pads, right?
Yep. The big squishy shoulder pads, so you can go like that.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right. So teams, questions, shoot.
Yeah. So what? Little nervous here. What? The first kind of thing we got to look at is the channel setup. What is your recommendation? Do you just go all in and just start forcing channels? Do you ease into the process?
No, so it depends on how you work. There's different ways to do this, right? So for me, for example, so let me give you a use case. So my immediate team that I work with, we're a team of 60, and I lead a team of 60 around the world. And the channel setup we've configured is based on the function of the team. So I'm in a marketing organization. Mm-hmm. So there's a general channel that comes with each team. That's kind of like the water cooler. People jump in there, ask questions, but that's more targeted to pretty much everybody. Okay. And then there's a channel for, let's say, campaigns. So all the active campaigns that we're working on. So my colleague, Michael, who runs a lot of our campaigns, he would say, "Hey team, this is the new campaign, questions, here are all the materials, blah, blah, blah." We have a channel for our field marketing colleagues. Our field sits in different parts of the world. So when they have events coming up, so for example, the recent Microsoft Tech Summit, so all of our collateral information will be there. If they have feedback, here's a lesson learned from this event in UK. So guys who's going to Stockholm next, make sure you talk about this or don't talk about that. So it's based on function, but there's no hard and fast rule to say, we should structure it like folders, mm-hmm. because it just doesn't really work that way. And through time, right, you learn. One thing I just can't wait for Microsoft to come up with is the ability to move channels, for example, across teams, or to move conversations within channels to different channels, right? Because once you get the hang of it and then you realize, well, that was stupid, I didn't need that channel. So you may want to get rid of it, but you don't want to get rid of the conversation. So the ability to move it down the road, I think, will be beneficial. So my advice is don't go overly crazy as you get started with a bunch of channels. General, and then start with what makes sense, right? Like if you have active projects, or you can say campaigns, or mm-hmm. each project can have its own channel, because a channel will have a file repository. So all the things like you were talking about in Basecamp, right?
Yep.
Let's say this show can be a channel. Then all the files will be there, and you can instantiate a planner. You create a new tab for a planner, and you can put all the tasks and whatnot. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it can be project-based. I know our sales team, for example, each salesperson has their own channel. So literally, you go to their sales team, each channel is a person's name. So all the conversations about this person and their customers, and they would pull in other people to their own channel. So, gotcha. Whatever works best. But to me, again, I find based on the function and the purpose of what you're doing.
Yeah, and so I think you hit on it here a little bit, but I'll ask it anyways. How do you avoid becoming oversaturated? Because that's one of the problems we have on Basecamp, is that there's just so many individual projects that, yes, I mean, the people working on them know how to find them, but if we onboard somebody new, it would be a nightmare for them to try to find this stuff.
No, that's a great question, and that's a lesson that we have to learn ourselves when we started using Teams day one when Satya announced it, right? So it took a while, but what I would suggest is you look at what you're doing today and start with that. Meaning you look at if it's projects, right? So like this podcast again.
Mm-hmm.
So start with that and start with a couple projects that you have today. I don't advise that you go. I don't advise that you structure it based on, again, like how you have file shares or what you're used to with sites, and essentially have some. We talk about governance, but some kind of standard on how you're going to use teams. Because if you don't put some level of standard or governance, then yeah, people will just create teams for everything, and that's the problem we face early on. Is, oh, we need a team for this, we need a team for that. No, not really. I mean, all you need is channel. In the past, when we got started, every project has its own teams, which was too much. So the good thing about your group as you're getting started and you're not like shutting off some other tools is start small, start what makes sense, and establish guidelines. So you can say for every project, we're going to create a channel. We're not going to create a team. You may have a whole team just for projects, right? And each channel is a project, but that's it. And then you may have another team for your, day-to-day business as usual stuff. You may have a channel for accounting, a channel for marketing, etc.
Question, and I don't know if this is possible yet. I haven't found it, so you're the perfect person to ask. One of the things we do on Petri a lot is webinars, right? We go to Veeam, we go to AvePoint, we go to anybody else, and we sell a webinar, and it immediately kicks off a series of steps, right? We have creative that has to be done. We have email campaigns that have to be done.
Sure.
And essentially there's a checklist. Is there any way inside of Teams that you know of yet so that, let's say marketing says we've sold a webinar to Dux, and then he goes and creates that thing that he can then, essentially what we need is a checklist box that goes inside of there so that Nicole can go get the creative, I can find the speakers and all that kind of thing?
I mean, the answer is yes, absolutely. But now the question is how far you want to take it. So it could be as simple as, look, for example, there's a new customer come in. We need to do a webinar. We need to do the email. Then you can just put it in a simple OneNote, right? So there's a checklist for setting up a webinar. That's as simple as it can be. You put the checklist there. So in the checklist, you say step 1. So once we have a new customer, create a new channel. Then you go create a new channel. Step 2. Make sure you fill out this form for the marketing automation emails that goes out, right? So you can do it that way. The other way you could do it, if you want to be fancy, is you can start using bots. So there's a lot of little cool bots that's available in the Team Store, and some of them are free, where you can put some of the automation. And literally, Nicole could just say, hey, just literally talk to the bot and say, hey, we need to start a new webinar. What should I do first? The bot would say, go do this. Go do that, which is kind of cool. Yeah. But essentially, it's automating a lot of the steps that you have, and then providing that as a response back to the person asking.
Gotcha. So what it sounds like you're saying is, yes, that functionality is possible. I've just kind of got to figure out what's going to be the correct path about how automated or unautomated, I guess, we want to take it.
Correct. Yeah.
Interesting. That's if George is listening. I really don't like Basecamp, George, and I will do anything hell or high water to get off of Basecamp and get us into Teams or something else that's much more centralized. That's kind of the goal here.
One thing, for example, this is very common to us too. So, for example, let's say we have a colleague from Germany who's requesting for an event. So if you request for an event, there's a series of things that needs to happen, right? There's approval, there's budget and whatnot. So what they do is they come to a request form, and we use Microsoft Forms for it. So they go to our Office 365 intranet, they fill out this request form. As soon as they hit send, based on who they are in the organization, if I'm part of a German business unit, it routes to our German marketing manager. Our German marketing manager would now look at it and say, okay, this is legit. We have budget for it. And then she would continue on from that form, and then assign people to it. Now, okay, let's have some banners created. Let's have some videos created. So all that is done and tracked with Microsoft Form in conjunction with Microsoft Flow. Now, the cool thing is all this shows up on Teams. So the marketing, while the request came from the business where they filled out some form on our intranet, but the request, when it was sent, it popped up on Teams. We just had a tab that just show the results of this form or these inquiry. So there's a lot of different ways to do this. And the cool thing about it is because of the integration with the other Office 365 tool, you can come up with these type of functionality.
See, now that's really, really interesting. And that's something I'm probably going to have to teach myself or help Tim learn how to do it, is because that kind of solves the scenario right there, is that Corey sells a webinar. He could go in, fill out that form, and then that way we know what, because depending on the webinar, you can buy different pieces or whatever. He can fill out that form as sold. It kicks it over into Teams, and then that kicks off Nicole and I and Tina to get our work to fulfill that request.
Yeah, so what I would recommend is if you have those type of automation needs, definitely look at Microsoft Flow and Microsoft Form, and yeah, you can make it show up on Teams.
Well, you've just given me some homework, Dux. I don't know if I should thank you or...
No, where do I send the invoice again, Brad?
Well, that wraps it up for today, folks. What else is going on in your life, man? I think we got a little bit of time left here. I think it's time for the Dux Dish.
All right, time for the Dux Dish. Man, it's just been... I think the last time we talked was almost a month ago. It's been crazy. I mean, springtime is busy. Next couple of weeks, I'll be on the road. So next week, I'll be in Stockholm for Tech Summit. I think it's the last one. It's been a great Tech Summit. And then what we're seeing a lot, especially working with customers, this whole adoption around Teams is just phenomenal. So we're doing a series of Microsoft Teams workshops across North America. Week after next, I'll be in Houston, and then there's one in New York, Atlanta, and Dallas. So really, it's just educating folks on how do you, number one, maximize Teams, like some of the questions you were asking, but second is ensure operational governance around Teams. Because you alluded to this earlier, Brad, where the last thing I want is people going crazy on this and start creating channels of Teams and whatnot. So I'm going to provide some practical guidance on how people should think about governance. Governance is such a big word, but really in the context of Teams and Office 365, it falls under three buckets: provisioning, management, and then how do you end of life content? Once the project is done, what happens to it, right? So that's what's on tap for me in the next couple of weeks, and looking forward to meet folks from around the world.
Very, very cool. And Dux, if you are going to their city, what is the best way to get in contact with you?
Awesome. So looking forward to connect with everybody. Best way to hit me up is on Twitter @MeetDux. So look me up on Twitter, and looking forward to engage with everyone.
Twitter is a great tool. It's actually one of the ways Dux and I first got in contact many, many years ago, and continues to be a great service.
Yeah, I think I got connected with you because you had a conversation with Donna Sarkar around drinking in Australia, and that caught my eye.
Well, as is, after you fly down to Australia, the first thing you are going to want to do is have a drink, because that is a terrible flight. No other way to describe it. You got anything else for us, Dux, before we wrap it up today?
Pretty much, again, thank you, Brad. And look, Office 365 is here to stay. If you're taking advantage of this platform, make sure you maximize all the other goodness beyond email, Teams, Office 365 groups. Check out Petri.com, and hopefully I'll get to write more stuff and share more insights and lessons learned on how you can best use Office 365. Other than that, back to you, Brad.
Well, look at that. He's throwing out free plugs. That means we have to have him back. Well, Dux, we very much appreciate your time, and as always, your insight is invaluable, and definitely stop by and check out Dux when he's traveling around the world, and don't be afraid to connect, because as you can see on this podcast, he has a lot of knowledge and a lot of just general insight about the process of moving that is not so easy to find, which is one of the reasons why we love having him here. Thanks for stopping by, Dux, and we will see you guys next time on the Enterprise Dish.
Ciao, bye.